Hi, folks. I'm meteorologist Don Paul here on my YouTube channel, Don Paul Weather Plus. And again, I ask you to please hit the subscribe button beneath the video. That's what's going to keep this going. Sorry to repeat myself if you're a regular viewer. And by the way, if you like this YouTube channel, tell your friends. And if you hate it, tell your enemies. That'll get back at them. Let's show you what's going on, not just globally, but regionally. While we are suffering, if you want to call it that, more days than not, with below average temperatures, here is one of the primary reasons why. It's Greenland. You see that red area? That is a blocking mountain of high pressure stacked way up into the atmosphere from the surface up, and it blocks west to east motion and helps to force the northern branch of the jet stream to buckle. And here is where it buckles. Over the central part of the nation, this trough is going to migrate to the east tomorrow. With it will come an increased chance for showers and maybe some thunderstorms, some more significant rainfall. And this kind of block over Greenland in mid-June is quite atypical, unusual. Kind of get my drift there? There is good evidence that the more frequent episodes of blocking that we're seeing, particularly the blocking that occurs in the warm weather months, is linked to the warming climate. The Arctic, the polar regions, as predicted in climate models way back in the 1980s, is warming up twice as fast as the rest of the globe because the Arctic Ocean is an ocean. Its highly reflective white ice is dissipating, and instead of reflecting, when that ice melts, it's replaced by dark ocean waters which absorb solar heat. And in fact, the animation that NASA has from satellite imagery going back to 1979. I've shown this before, but I'm going to show it again here. This is from satellite imagery records, which for the Arctic Ocean began in 1979 up through last year, and we'll let her rip as it goes along through time. You will note the shape changes each year, but the total coverage is on a downward trend. Not only that, because we're going with longer warm seasons and more heat absorption by the ocean, the winter is shorter for the refreeze, and with a shorter refreeze period, what happens then is the ice that does refreeze is thinner than it used to be, which means the following warm weather season, it melts more quickly. So there's a feedback mechanism which was well predicted and under physics really quite inevitable. And there's nothing in sight that's going to be reversing this Arctic warming. But this Arctic warming, again, is linked with what I showed you a moment ago, these kinds of blocking episodes. The warmth in the Arctic lessens the temperature contrast between the mid-latitudes and the polar latitudes. And when there's less temperature contrast, the jet stream with a strong polar vortex is more circular and circles up closer to the North Pole. But when the temperature contrast I just mentioned lessens, that jet stream weakens and it buckles more regularly. And these kind of blocking episodes can lead to some really serious problems, such as Hurricanes Harvey, the most expensive storm in U.S. history, and the following year, Florence in the Carolinas, were well predicted to stall once they crossed the coastline due to a blocking pattern in the atmosphere. And that led to just an incredible and unprecedented flooding during Harvey and awful flooding in the Florence episode as well. Also, blocking during the month of May created kind of a pathway for supercell, tornadic supercells in the central and southern plains, occasionally venturing a little more to the east toward Ohio. And so the blocking is tied to the Arctic warming. But while we are going to be staying more often than not with cooler than average days for the next few weeks, there are parts of the world that are getting opposite mechanisms. And we can take a look, for example, up in Alaska. Record-breaking heat, which showed up in May and continues now. If you ever channel surf, remember that show Ice Road Truckers? Well, it's still on. And it's symptomatic, but the trucking season for those truckers has been disastrous the last few years because it ends so early, and the roads and where they have to cross over rivers becoming absolutely treacherous due to the thinner ice, which melts quickly. And we've seen record warmth in the month of May, and we're still seeing it over much of Alaska, especially inland. And look at the darker red. That's where the greatest temperature anomaly is occurring, way up near Point Barrow and Prudhoe Bay. What is typically one of the coldest parts of the state is, relative to its averages, the warmest. Warmth all the way into the interior here as well, and into the Yukon and northwest portions of Canada. Extreme warmth. Just about 2 weeks ago, a far northwest reporting station in Arctic Russia came up with a high temperature of 84 degrees. That was in May near the Arctic Ocean, not right on the ocean, in Russia. So this kind of phenomenon is increasing, and most climate scientists and physicists link this pretty closely to the warming cycle, which the globe is undergoing and has been for decades, linked to human activity. Again, we know that if it weren't for human activity, at this time, the way the Earth's irregular, wobbly orbit runs, we would have been cooling for the last century, not necessarily heading into another ice age. There is no other explanation for the warming that's been going on. Solar input has not increased. In fact, in the last 3 decades, there's been a slight reduction in solar irradiance. That's measured daily, and it's in great detail. Another part of the world which has really been suffering prior to the onset of the monsoon season has been much of the interior of India. For example, New Delhi just on Monday had a high temperature of 118 degrees. Now, because humidity hasn't maxed out, you typically can't get quite that hot when the monsoons come in because moisture tempers the actual temperature. But this is life-threatening heat on a grand scale, since hundreds of millions of people live here and have been undergoing 110-plus degree high temperatures day after day. When the monsoon starts to really get going, the actual temperatures will go down, but then evaporative cooling on humanity's skin collectively will be going down too, with more humidity in the air. So this is a tough time for other parts of the world, which is why crusty old Don Paul sometimes grows weary of our weather whining. Because yes, it has been a disappointing spring, and although this day that I'm recording this, on Wednesday, is a pretty nice day, and we are warming up into the 70s, our weather problems just pale compared to May in Oklahoma and Kansas and parts of Texas and Missouri and even parts of Ohio. Our problems pale compared to the complications in the Arctic and what that's doing globally. And of course, to the second most populous nation on earth, India. We may not think about them all that often, but that's a population of well over 1 billion people with a difficult climate. And even though their technology is advancing dramatically, that's a difficult way to live. And even in the areas close to the Himalayas, it's not as hot here as here, but this shows the temperature anomaly, how far from average it is. So we're getting tremendous melting of the glaciers in the Himalayas, and that is leading to lots of problems in the lowland. And then as you move to the northeast toward China, there's tremendous interior heat as well. So my only point to today's drifty climate-related topic is the cliche applies. Things could be worse. They could be a lot worse. It sounds like a mattress commercial. Anyway, we'll be coming back to climate science quite often, since it's not going to be changing a whole lot in a good direction in the near future. And I will be talking with you about things in the near term weather very shortly. Thanks, and again, please subscribe.